Because all of us know here that there was a time when the tourist tax money was very high, the property tax revenue was very high, and now we have a shortfall when it comes to the tourist tax dollar, when it comes to the convention center. We don't have enough money to cover it. Why didn't we make smarter decisions for the future? Why didn't we put money aside in reserves? Because we knew this economy was going to bust. Why didn't we make stronger efforts to pay our bonds down when we had an influx of money? This is where we're talking about fiscal responsibility to us, the taxpayers. It's our money. We're the ones contributing to this economy. And although a vision is great and we're looking forward, we also have to be responsible. We have a generation growing up behind us. You know, we're our grandkids, our children, and we've got to be responsible to their future because the debt that they're going to carry is going to be a burden to them. Thank you.
Ms. Bazama, you're in, then we'll go to Ms. Thompson.
You know, these three venue items were voted on in one motion. I would not have done that. I would have made sure that they were broken up into three separate motions, or I would have voted no. If it were the case of, just to say if it were separate, I would have made sure that the Magic had a little bit more responsibility than taking it out of the tourist tax dollars or putting it on the taxpayers. So I would not have been for this project unless that would have been the case. Thank you.
I concur with everything that's being said here right now, as it relates. But I really concur with Mrs. Jacobs because, you guys, that's the law. That's how it's set up. And it's easy to say that we would do it different, but when the tourist community asked to be taxed within the tourism-based community, they asked to pay a little extra so that down the road they would be able to put dollars into certain funds for certain programs. You know, I would go back and say, you know, East Orange County, we should look at the way that we've grown over the years, and maybe we should look at, you know, maybe taking those same principles that they did over in the tourism industry, and we should have from day one said, hey, if you know you want to keep calling us sprawl, it's easy to call us sprawl when you are downtown, but here, maybe we need to look at the types of programs that they put together with the tourism community and maybe put them here. You know, tax us or let us keep some of our dollars that we spend in tax dollars every day and let us keep them right here in this community. And maybe then we could have some efficiencies and maybe we could have some additional services that we haven't seen either.
Simple question. You said, by the way, was this voter approved? Okay, you keep saying the tourist community. So, I mean, I'm a little confused. I'm just asking. You act like they voted themselves a tax, but they just said that
the tourism industry years ago said we need to know that we have dollars in order to keep this industry strong. The tourism community, the hoteliers, the theme parks, those guys said we'll pay a little extra if those dollars can be earmarked for our industry. Those dollars are earmarked to help keep that industry
strong. Specifically for this was not a voter approval. Because tourist tax is also on the East Coast as well. They vote for a certain thing. I'm saying, but this part, this was voted, and I'll get to this in a second, you guys plenty of time. This was not a voter approved, correct?
No, the county commission approved
I understand
how to allocate those tourism dollars.
No, I'm just trying to communicate, yeah, because sometimes some things are voter approved, and what you're asking, I didn't know if it was, some people might confuse it, if it was voter approved or if it wasn't. Some things can be picked like, hey, going to, money to Disney whatsoever. Hypothetically, but I'm just saying, you said the tourist community stuff, I'm trying to clarify for the audience.
The industry.
Okay.
The industry years
But it
ago
wasn't voter
came to
approved.
the county
Okay,
commission.
okay.
No, they said tax us specifically. I would say that East Orange County, we should have looked at something like that years ago. Because if we had said, whether we were a community development district, a CRA, whatever it was, if we had said, put dollars that we're spending and earmark them specifically for our infrastructure improvements, those would have been great things.
Go ahead, Mr. Clark.
Well, get back to the question why we would have arenas and so forth and not fund healthcare programs. If you're clever and smart, you can do both. And the fact is, with the tourist development tax, legally there are certain things you can do, and that's how the Fort County Commissioners approved it. And I think the other clever thing the county did is, basically the city is the one that's on the hook for it.
Right.
And yeah, they may come calling someday. We may have to face that as commissioners. To go to the crux of the question, the primary care clinics and so forth, I guess they're talking about primary care access network. That's a $10 million to $11 million authorization out of the general fund, and it turns into actually a $30 million program through financing, fee collection, certain things that we can do with clinical services. In fact, I know about it because I started it, so I'll be good to myself right now. In 1999, we had 5,000 patients in primary care in the county. We now have 120,000 patients. Over 10 years, an increase of $3 million. Every commissioner sitting here has always approved PCAN, has approved this year. It is totally funded, and folks will have access to primary care so they keep their families intact in their jobs.
Mr. Falconer, you're next. Yeah, this is primarily, I wanted to, it was asked for also the county commission, but also since you guys, this is a big issue because it is a city thing. Explain the question, how can the county afford to give a $600 million arena to a billionaire?
Well, in deference to Ms. Jacobs, we're running to be lawmakers. We make and change laws all the time. And we could have and should have, and I suggested at the time, we take those tax dollars and pay off the $1 billion debt we have in the convention center. Then we can take the money that is going from the Orange County budget to the convention center and allocate it elsewhere, like pea-care clinics. I suggested at the time that the Magic renovate that arena because they only wanted another $9 or $10 million a year. They could have moved the luxury boxes to the bottom. We could even sell it to them, to their owners instead of renters, and they can't hold us up every 15 years for a new arena. I also suggested and have litigated against Orange County against the Sunrail project because it's unconstitutional. My opponents try to do an end run around the Constitution by not putting it on the ballot. I suggest we take the $534 million that's in the bank in Tallahassee and put that towards education because we're going to lay off 10,000 teachers in the state of Florida next year. I suggest we take the $31 million that's in the bank in Orange County dedicated to Sunrail and put it towards public safety because we're going to lay off 111 sheriff's deputies next year. This is a question about priorities. This is a question about common sense. And if you look at my opponent's election donations, you'll see some campaign donations from the Magic people and their consultants.
Mr. Sieg, quick question. The tourism, because I wanted, this is very confusing. The tourist money, was there explain, does it come from a surcharge on car rentals? Where does it, first off, you take a couple seconds, I'll give you guys more. Explain where the tourist money comes from. What is taxed? Hotels, surcharge,
I think that's great because this discussion is going all over the world. We have, I believe, 6 pennies, is that correct? And each one of those pennies is proscribed by the state legislature and the county commission on how they can be used for certain things. I think Commissioner Jacobs spelled it out pretty well. Arenas, tourist development tax, the performing arts center. That's it. It's totally limited. You can't use it for all these things. That's why I fault my friend Mr. Falconer sometimes because he mixes up all these pots of money. We are proscribed by law to only use them for certain things. I supported the venues. I think that this event center that we have is going to be fantastic. It's going to be a great community benefit. It's a lot more than just the Magic. We have the NBA game coming here next year that's going to drive loads of well-to-do tourists to this area. It's going to be a wonderful economic development tool. So I do support them. The pecan clinics, that's another thing. That's from general revenue and other grants and that we may get at the county. So you're mixing up apples and oranges here.
Ms. Stewart, on this issue, and again to clarify, because it's a fascinating issue, was there enough money in the tourist tax to complete that, or is it spread over the several years until it gets done? But it's only paid with tourist tax. So was there enough money? Did the Magic kick in any money at all to partner with that?
Well, of course, the Magic did kick in money, but this was based on an agreement on the bed tax that was collected from all of the hoteliers. And they agreed to go into this relationship with the city of Orlando and the 3 venues. So that's why the voters didn't approve of it. It was approved by those who were collecting the bed tax. That's where the 6 cents are all coming from. Back in 2006, I went to the legislative delegation and I asked them, because Randy Johnson many years ago had added the word sports to one of the categories that we could spend tourist development tax on. I went back to the legislators in 2006 and asked them, could we add some more categories? Transportation. Tourists use our roads. Why can we not put transportation on them? Economic development. We're always looking for money for that. Why can't we put a category that says tourist tax, bed tax could be used for economic development? This is a role that the legislators have to agree on. They have never done that, so we're limited to where we can spend the money. If you use the roads, I think the tourist community should have to pay for it. If they did that, if they added the categories, then that would relieve our budget where we could spread it around in the other areas where we're deficient, like the health care or any other area where we're finding it tight to provide the services. So if we can start this, and we can't do it now because we've obligated ourselves, but sometime down the road, we may be very well easy to get the legislators to add some categories.
Mr. Siegel, you're next. This is a fascinating question. This story doesn't seem to go anywhere, even on my radio show. This is especially with the Sunrail. Big issue, highly known among Central Florida, from Tampa over to Cocoa Beach and involved here. And I may have a follow-up question on some of these because it's a fascinating issue. On the sunrails, give me all of you, your supported or opposed and why. And I'll may have a follow-up after that, after you guys have your answer. Supported it, against it,
Sure.
and why were you for or against it?
And again, a lifelong resident, and I mention that because I really know the route, and it's a wonderful route. A lot of times I hear people talk about the one in Miami. It was a terrible route. This is a fabulous route. It is going to change the face of Central Florida.
Talking from Tampa to Orlando.
Now, I'm talking Sunrail now.
Right.
That's the one from Volusia that'll go down to Ponciana, all the way through Orange County, Seminole County, and that is the local commuter rail. A great route. We're going to have we're going to have transit-oriented development grow up around it. A great way to start a transportation system. I got to tell my friends on the east and west side, may not directly affect you. I met a guy in Winter Garden a few months ago. He's going to be working on it. It's going to create a load of jobs.
Stick with me on Sunrail.
Okay, that is Sunrail. I think you're talking about the high-speed
The
rail.
high-speed Sunrail. I understand about the commuter rail, but the high-speed Sunrail from Tampa. What do you guys call it?
They just call it high-speed rail.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
They always refer to it as the Sunrail Devon. I understand. High-speed rail
Okay.
from Tampa down to up to Orlando.
The high-speed rail is one of these things that just fell out of heaven, and as Commissioner Jacobs says, she's right, money doesn't come out of trees, but this was not our money. This was not state money. We had no participation. This was a federal program that's going to run from Tampa to the airport. There's a debate on where Sunrail and high-speed rail will meet. Again, I'm a bigger promoter of Sunrail than I would have necessarily been high-speed rail, but it is money that will help this economy, and eventually they want to go from Tampa to the Orlando airport and then hook down and go down to Miami.
All right, Ms. Jacobs, you're next.
Thank you.
Focus with me on the high-speed
I'm with you.
rail. I'm with you. I
I'm
apologize.
with
There's so many people, it's convoluted in some areas. They think commuter rail is part of the high-speed rail, which is
Yeah,
not.
it is convoluted, and we have two different rails that are being proposed and talked about. Sunrail, we're not going to talk about. You want to talk about high-speed rail from here to Tampa. I do not support the high-speed rail from here to Tampa if it involves any local or state funding. The way it was supposed to work initially, years ago, when it was first proposed, it was going to be built and operated by the private sector. The state was going to put it out to bid and say who wants to build this train and who wants to operate it. The role of the state and the people of the state of Florida was to give up the right-of-way along the median of I-4 from here to Tampa. That was our total as citizens' contribution. I think it would not be cost feasible. I think if you got somebody to build and operate that train, they couldn't operate it for a price that would make sense to the riders. Now, federal stimulus dollars kick in, and suddenly we've got the federal government saying, and the state of Florida went to them and said, we would like full funding to build it, still 100% operated privately. The federal government gave 50%. That means somebody's got to come up with the other 50%. If that's coming off the local taxpayers' backs, no way. We cannot afford it. It is not necessary. And if it's coming out of the state's coffers, they can't afford it either. But, you know, of course, that's not what I'm running for here. I'm running for local office. But I won't support any local funds being going to building or operating high-speed rail. I don't think it's needed or warranted at this point.
Thank you. The federal government, because we had a shovel-ready project that, based on a committee that had formed during Governor Bush's administration, had this plan in mothballs for a while, because that plan, and the reason it was in mothballs, is it called for 50%, 50%. And the governor at that time says, we don't have that money, and I don't know when we're ever going to get that money, so it was put away. However, when the federal government came in and they wanted to build a rail system throughout the whole United States, we were able to bring that application back up, because if you'll recall the word shovel-ready, that really was shovel-ready, and they are going to pay the first phase $1.5 billion. They have all, and the state does have to provide the right-of-way. That's their contribution. The second phase we have not been funded, which is going to be, I think, another $1.5 billion that will be coming our way. That has not been done. We're still working with the first half of it. We've also gotten a $500,000 study, because what we didn't have was we did not have the environmental studies to go from Orlando to Miami. I prefer the Orlando to Miami route. Frankly, I would have hoped that we had had the environmental study for that, because that's going to produce the most ridership, and that's what's going to provide us with, and those businesses that are privately going to run it, they'll be much more happy with going from here to Miami on the first phase. That is not what they picked. They picked Orlando to Tampa first phase. And then the other element that's missing, but it is coming up in the second